Part 1. The shocking dinner/bua toy SOC. I thought tonight would be special. My son insisted we go to a fancy Italian restaurant downtown to celebrate his promotion. I bought a new dress, styled my silver hair, and even wore my favorite pearl earrings. Candles flickered on the table, the soft aroma of garlic and basil filling the room. At first, everything seemed perfect. My son smiled, my grandchildren were excited, and my daughter-in-law, Romy, seemed unusually tense. I tried sharing stories from our family trip last month, but her eyes narrowed and her lips pressed into a thin line. Then it happened. While I reached for the breadbasket, she snapped. "Evil old woman. You shouldn't come here." Her voice rang across the restaurant. Everyone turned to look. Before I could react, she grabbed my plate and hurled it to the floor. It shattered, and my heart sank. I sat there, stunned. My son's face turned pale, my grandchildren looked confused and scared, and I felt a wave of betrayal. The woman I had welcomed into our family, the mother of my grandchildren, had humiliated me in front of everyone I loved. But as I watched her, I realized something important. I had spent decades nurturing this family, offering love and guidance, and her cruelty could not erase the life I had built. I stood up slowly, voice calm but firm. "That's enough," I said. "We will leave now." As we walked out, I felt the first spark of liberation. Tonight was a betrayal, yes, but also a wake-up call. I would protect my heart, my dignity, and my family from anyone, even those I had once trusted the most. Part 2. Silent betrayal at home/fan boi. Tam Taina. The morning after the restaurant incident, I returned home feeling the weight of the previous night. The house felt colder, emptier without the usual warmth of family chatter. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, casting stripes across the kitchen floor. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the aroma usually comforting now bittersweet. I walked through the living room, noticing small signs of change. My son's chair remained in its place, but the cushions were fluffed differently, as if someone else had touched them. Pictures on the wall, family vacations, birthdays, graduations, seemed like silent witnesses to the shift. My daughter-in-law had already begun subtly rearranging things, leaving her mark on spaces that were once mine. At the kitchen table, I saw notes left by her, reminders, instructions, subtle claims over areas of the house. Every detail felt calculated, a way of establishing dominance under the guise of care. I kept my composure, folding the napkins and clearing the breakfast dishes, feeling the tension but refusing to acknowledge it aloud. Even in these quiet moments, I could sense the subtle manipulation. The warmth of my home had been invaded not by force, but by small, precise intrusions. I did not speak, I did not argue. I simply carried on, knowing that every silent action was a test, and that patience and observation were my weapons. I sipped my coffee and looked out the window, thinking, this is not the end. The evening at the restaurant was only the first act. I needed to understand the full story, to trace the undercurrents that had crept into my family. And I would. Step by step, quietly, I would reclaim the home and respect I had nurtured for decades. Part 3. The unsettling truth emerges/Sue that Ko Chiu Zut Hien. 2 days after the restaurant incident, I noticed more than small changes around the house. Letters, bills, and memos appeared in my personal space, with subtle comments from my daughter-in-law Romy, suggesting I was incapable of managing my own affairs. The shift wasn't loud. It was in the quiet control, the small adjustments to routines that were once familiar to me. I began to overhear her conversations with my son, Wade. Her voice, soft and deliberate, was peppered with subtle manipulations. She suggested rearranging finances, questioned my decisions about family events, and even made casual remarks about my health, as if to plant seeds of doubt and justify her control. I did not respond aloud. I observed. I noted. Every small act became a signal. When she suggested I needed help handling the bills, I remembered that I had managed this house alone for decades. When she commented on the meals I prepared for family dinners, I recalled the countless evenings spent planning, cooking, and setting the table perfectly. The humiliation was silent, yet its weight was unmistakable. I resolved not to react impulsively. Instead, I documented each interaction, each subtle infringement. These were the pieces of a larger puzzle, and I intended to understand the full scope of Romy's intrusion. My silence was not weakness, it was preparation. I would wait, observe, and act strategically when the moment was right. Each evening, I sat in the living room, cup of tea in hand, replaying the events in my mind. The pattern was clear. This was not a momentary lapse of respect or courtesy. It was a carefully orchestrated effort to undermine me and reshape the home. I could feel the tension, but I stayed composed, knowing the story was far from over. Part 4. Subtle Manipulations and Quiet Resilience / Su Tao Tung Tin 6 Ba Su Kien Kwang M Tam. As the days passed, the tension in the house grew. My daughter-in-law Romy began to take over more responsibilities, always offering helpful suggestions that subtly undermined my authority. She questioned the way I organized family documents, the recipes I prepared, even the way I set the table. Each comment was a tiny, precise strike intended to destabilize me. Despite this, I maintained a calm exterior. I continued my routines, pouring tea for my grandchildren, arranging flowers on the dining table, and preparing meals just as I always had. Each action was deliberate, demonstrating that while they could attempt to unsettle me, they could not erase the years of care and presence I had invested in this home. I noticed the way Romy watched me closely, trying to gauge reactions. She attempted to control conversations, redirecting attention, making subtle jabs disguised as advice. I didn't respond to the provocations. Instead, I observed, noting patterns, calculating my steps quietly. My silence became a shield, my composure, a quiet form of power. Every evening, I reviewed my notes. I cataloged each intrusion, every overstep. I understood the landscape of this battle, not in anger, but in clarity. Romy believed she held power, but I was patient. My plan was quiet, precise, and deliberate. One day, the truth would surface, and the house would reflect the respect it once did. Part 5. Quiet Observations and Strategic Patience / Quan Sat M Tam Vak Kien Nan Chien Loak. As the week unfolded, I paid careful attention to every gesture, every word exchanged in the house. Romy continued to assert control, but I had learned to detect the patterns, the way she moved items, how she spoke to my grandchildren, the subtle judgments she cast over routines I had established for decades. I did not engage. I maintained my routines, tidying the rooms, preparing meals, arranging the table, and ensuring the house retained the warmth it had always had. Each action reinforced the presence and authority I had built over the years. I spoke only when necessary, and when I did, my words were measured and calm, exposing nothing of the turmoil I observed. The grandchildren, innocent in their curiosity, began to notice my composure. They asked for guidance in simple tasks, which I offered patiently. Romy's influence was growing, but the foundation I had established with love and care for decades remained intact beneath the surface. I took mental notes, tracking each subtle overstep, each manipulative comment, preparing for the moment when I would reclaim control. Patience was my strategy. Observation was my weapon. I knew that the house, my home, was a story written over decades, and no intrusion, no matter how sly, could erase that legacy. Part 6. The Quiet Test of Loyalties / Thursday Thatch Im Lang Vi Long Trung Tan. By the middle of the week, I could sense the subtle shifts in alliances within the house. Romy's attempts to dominate the space became more deliberate. She positioned herself between me and my grandchildren, offered instructions on household routines, and made remarks implying I was out of touch with modern family needs. I observed without engaging. Each interaction was noted mentally, each subtle intrusion catalogued. I maintained the usual rhythm of my life, preparing meals, setting the table, pouring tea, and spending quiet moments with my grandchildren. I made no outward reaction to her comments, allowing her to believe she held control. The grandchildren's behavior provided subtle clues. They looked to me for reassurance, quietly seeking guidance when Romy's instructions conflicted with established routines. I responded calmly, affirming their trust without confrontation. Each small moment strengthened the bond between us, a silent counterweight to Romy's influence. I started to notice patterns in Romy's tactics. She emphasized dependency, suggested inefficiency on my part, and strategically offered guidance that undermined my authority. I recorded everything mentally, preparing for the moment when careful observation would convert into decisive action. My strategy remained patience, observation, and quiet consistency. Each night, I reflected quietly in the living room, sipping tea, feeling the undercurrent of control she tried to establish. I understood her motives, but did not confront them directly. Instead, I reinforced my presence through deliberate, calm actions, reminding both my family and myself that experience and patience carry weight beyond forceful displays. Part 7. The calm before the confrontation/ban yen truok con bow. By the end of the week, the tension in the house had reached an almost tangible weight. Romi's maneuvers were no longer subtle. She openly suggested I was too old to handle certain tasks, and she took liberties in correcting even the smallest details of my work. Yet, I remained composed. I greeted each remark with a neutral tone, answering questions without frustration and letting my calmness speak louder than words. I noticed my grandchildren watching me more closely than ever. Their eyes searched for reassurance, and I returned smiles that were both warm and quiet, reinforcing our silent pact. These little glances, these fleeting gestures of trust, gave me strength. I realized that my influence, though quiet, was far more resilient than Romi's overt control. In the kitchen, I continued my routines with methodical precision. Preparing meals, arranging plates, and setting the table were no longer simple tasks. They became statements of consistency and patience. Each measured action was a reminder to everyone in the house that experience and grace cannot be rushed or undermined. Even as Romi tried to provoke, I maintained a steady presence. I spoke softly, moved deliberately, and allowed my quiet confidence to cast a subtle shadow over her attempts. In these moments, I felt the power of restraint, how observing, waiting, and acting with intention could shape the family's dynamics more than any argument or display of anger. As the week drew to a close, I realized the quiet test of loyalties had strengthened my understanding of those around me. Patience and observation were not passive. They were preparation for the decisive moments ahead. I knew the coming days would reveal the true allegiances within my family, and I would be ready. Part 8. The subtle confrontation/kuok doi dao tin to Monday arrived with the crisp air of early spring, and the household settled into the usual rhythm. Yet, beneath the surface, the tension that had been building over the past week began to ripple outward. Romi, emboldened by her perceived dominance, tried to assert her control even more openly, offering unsolicited advice to my grandchildren and questioning my decisions in front of the family. I chose my moments carefully. During breakfast, when she attempted to rearrange the seating for the children, I calmly suggested, "Perhaps we should keep the usual places. It helps everyone feel comfortable." My tone was soft but firm, leaving no room for argument. Her eyes flickered with irritation, yet I held my gaze steadily, silently signaling that I would not be intimidated. Throughout the day, I maintained my routines with deliberate precision. Cooking lunch, tidying up, and sharing small moments of encouragement with my grandchildren became acts of quiet defiance. Each smile, each gentle correction, was a reminder that experience and patience could outlast impatience and aggression. By late afternoon, Romi tried a more direct approach, questioning my handling of a household task. I responded without raising my voice. "Thank you for your input, but I think I have this covered." My calm response created an unexpected pause. Her momentum halted, and I could sense the subtle shift in power. Evening came, and the family gathered in the living room. I observed Romi's attempts to dominate the conversation, gently redirecting topics with thoughtful remarks and questions that included everyone. Slowly, the balance began to restore itself, the silent loyalty of my grandchildren reinforcing my presence. By the time the day ended, I realized that confrontation did not always require anger or loud words. Through quiet assertion, steady routines, and mindful observation, I had established my authority without escalating conflict, preparing the household for the challenges ahead. Part 9. The first signs of change/Dao Hu Thay Doi Dao Tien Tuesday morning brought a quiet shift. Romi's confidence, previously unshakable, began to show cracks. During breakfast, she hesitated when instructing the children, glancing briefly at me as if gauging my response. I maintained my composed demeanor, answering gently and reinforcing the routines that had always brought comfort to the household. I observed that my grandchildren subtly sought my approval more often. Small acts, like passing me a utensil or waiting for a nod before starting their tasks, showed a growing trust in my guidance over Romy's commands. These quiet acknowledgments were powerful. They signaled that the balance of influence was slowly beginning to tip. Throughout the day, I continued my careful engagement. In the kitchen, I prepared meals with deliberate attention to detail, ensuring every dish reflected both love and competence. Romy, noticing the smooth flow of my work, could not find the usual openings to assert control. I spoke softly, included everyone in conversations, and let patience guide every action. The household seemed to breathe easier under this steady rhythm. By afternoon, I began to test boundaries subtly. When Romy attempted to redirect a family project without consulting me, I calmly suggested an alternative that incorporated her ideas but maintained my oversight. She paused, a flicker of surprise crossing her face, realizing that her influence was no longer absolute. The children, observing this exchange, reinforced my authority silently, following instructions that aligned with our established routines. Evening brought a moment of quiet satisfaction. While Romy tried to regain control during dinner, I subtly guided the flow of conversation, asking questions that drew out my grandchildren's opinions and including their voices. This small shift created a renewed sense of harmony, as everyone gradually adjusted to the balance I had quietly restored. I understood that change does not happen suddenly. It arrives in incremental steps, through consistent patience and measured responses. The first signs of transformation were visible, and I felt a quiet confidence that the household's true loyalties were beginning to reveal themselves. Part 10. The moment of reckoning/Cohen-Cock, quiet din Wednesday evening descended with a quiet intensity. I could feel the subtle tension in the air, thick as the aroma of the roast cooking in the oven. Romy, ever confident, moved about the kitchen, attempting to organize the children's homework and dictate the schedule for the rest of the evening. But tonight, something had shifted. The air felt different, heavier with the silent scrutiny of my presence. I placed the salad bowl on the table, deliberately slowing my movements, allowing each action to assert quiet authority. Each plate arranged, each utensil positioned with care, was a reminder that I had nurtured and maintained this home for decades. My calm, deliberate actions contrasted sharply with Romy's rushed, anxious energy. I observed her eyes flicker briefly with uncertainty, though she masked it quickly with practiced politeness. When she tried to redirect the conversation with a sharp comment about a minor household mishap, I met her gaze steadily. "Thank you for your suggestion, Romy. Let's proceed as usual," I said softly, but firmly. The words were simple, yet they carried weight. My grandchildren, sitting quietly, mirrored my demeanor, subtly reinforcing the order and calm I had established. The evening continued in a tense but measured rhythm. I noticed patterns emerging in Romy's behavior, a repeated need to assert control, an insistence on demonstrating competence. I let these moments pass, cataloging each with precision, mentally preparing for the decisive moment when observation would convert into action. Patience was no longer just a virtue. It was a strategic tool. Later, as dessert was served, Romy attempted another subtle intrusion, trying to suggest changes in the family routine. I responded with a smile and a quiet, measured counter. "That's an interesting idea. Let's try it another time." The simplicity of my response, combined with the calmness of my tone, disrupted her momentum. For a brief instant, her confidence wavered. By the time the children were off to bed, a subtle shift had occurred. The quiet authority I maintained had begun to resonate through the household. I could feel it in the gentle compliance of my grandchildren and the slight hesitation in Romy's movements. It was not yet victory, but the foundation for it had been laid. Tonight, I understood the power of steady presence, of measured patience, and of calm observation in reclaiming influence within a home that had been quietly slipping away. I ended the evening by retreating to the living room with a cup of tea. The room was quiet, the house settled, yet my mind was alert. Each small victory, each subtle assertion, was a step toward the greater reckoning that I knew was coming. I allowed myself a small, quiet smile, knowing that patience, strategy, and unwavering dignity would see me through the challenges that lay ahead. Part 11. The hidden betrayal revealed / be Matt Fanbo. Hello Thursday morning began quietly, Yet the atmosphere in the house was charged with anticipation. I had sensed that Romy's calm confidence was a veneer, and today, subtle cracks in her composure were already visible. She attempted to direct the children's breakfast routine, but her instructions were met with gentle obedience rather than the usual immediate compliance. It was a small but significant sign that the household's dynamics were beginning to shift. I continued my usual preparations, arranging the table for brunch, but I added subtle gestures to assert my presence, a deliberate placement of utensils, a careful alignment of plates, and thoughtful seating arrangements. Each detail communicated silently that I was not to be overlooked, and that authority built through decades of care could not be dismissed lightly. Romy tried to regain control by offering unsolicited commentary on the menu and questioning the timing of chores. I responded with calm, measured words. "Thank you for your input, Romy. Let's follow our usual schedule." The simplicity and consistency of my tone carried weight, leaving her momentarily uncertain. My grandchildren, attentive and sensitive to the unspoken, mirrored my composure and quietly reinforced the household's rhythm. Later, a slip of attention revealed more than Romy intended. She commented on financial matters, hinting at decisions that had been made without my knowledge. My curiosity was piqued, and I listened closely, cataloging every word. These revelations, though subtle, confirmed suspicions I had nurtured over weeks, that some family decisions had been quietly manipulated to diminish my influence. I stayed composed, noting each detail mentally, aware that patience and observation were crucial for the response I would craft. By evening, the quiet assertions I had made throughout the day began to yield results. The children sought my guidance more openly, and Romy's interventions became hesitant. It was a slow, deliberate reclaiming of influence, where silence, observation, and measured responses carried the weight of authority and revealed the true loyalties. Within the family. Part 12. The resolution and quiet triumph / Ket Tuk Bachien Tang Tam Lang. Friday morning arrived with the first light spilling softly into the kitchen. The week of careful observation, patience, and quiet assertions had finally brought clarity. Romy moved about with cautious gestures, no longer attempting to dominate the household, while the children instinctively looked to me for guidance, their trust reaffirmed. I prepared breakfast as usual, mindful of each detail. But today, every motion carried more than routine. It carried authority, experience, and a calm dignity that even Romy could not ignore. Each smile I shared with my grandchildren reinforced the bonds that had survived subtle attempts to undermine them. Later, we sat together at the table. I allowed Romy to speak, but gently redirected when necessary, maintaining an atmosphere of respect without confrontation. By evening, it was clear that my presence and consistent patience had shifted the household dynamic. Decisions that had once been dictated by her were now balanced by my steady oversight, a testament to the quiet power of resilience and careful strategy. As night fell, I retired to the living room, reflecting on the week's events. The home felt whole again, not through overt control or confrontation, but through subtle authority and unwavering dignity. I realized that true influence is not loud or aggressive. It is measured, consistent, and rooted in decades of love, care, and unwavering moral strength. With a soft sigh and a quiet smile, I understood that the bonds of family, though tested by greed and ambition, could endure when guided by patience, insight, and quiet determination. The week had begun with subtle betrayal, yet it ended with clarity, restored respect, and the unshakable knowledge that integrity and steadfastness will always prevail.